Unspoken Issues.
Unspoken Issues and the Unspoken Decade are proud to present the first of our long-form podcasts, subtitled Unspoken Epics. In these special episodes, instead of one single comic book, we will be broadening our focus to multiple issues surrounding a character, event, or story arc from the 1990s. We've wanted to do a long-form podcast for a while and share it with our Unspoken Issues fan base, but also did not want to confuse everybody with a completely new podcast name. We will still be doing our single-issue poll-driven discussions, but Unspoken Epics will pop up from time to time in the feed. So for this week and next week, we hope you enjoy the first of our two-part episode on Transformers Generation 2. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode. I am your conductor, as Dean Compton said. I am Jesse Starcher. And joining me this evening, Dean Compton here. You've come back, and we're talking more Transformers. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, listen. I can talk about the Transformers until I died, like literally until the moment I died. There's really not an aspect of the mythology, besides the movies, oddly enough, that I don't enjoy. Really got into War for Cybertron lately. But for me, the heyday is always going to be that Gen 1 stuff. That, you know, that's where I'm at. But to me, the Gen 2 stuff that we're talking about today, Transformers Generation 2, just as good as in its own way. I like the toys. I like this comic. I like the mythology that surrounds it. I think that it gets a bad rap, but I'm excited to, you know, let's say undo that rap like it was like terrible Christmas paper, right? Like we're gonna take it off. There's gonna be a beautiful present inside. I bet that happened to you too, dude. Like I used to get Christmas presents that like it'd be in a fucking box of boots. Like it's a boot box. I'm like, I don't need any boots. But then inside a bunch of Transformers. That's what we're gonna do today.
Yeah, well, you brought somebody along with you because you said we can't go about this just us two. We got to bring someone along that can carry their weight. And when I say weight, I mean Darry Weight. How you doing, sir? Welcome to the podcast.
Good. Thank you for having me. I was very excited to join you guys tonight.
Dean, you said Generation 2. Jesse, you gotta talk about Generation 2. So this is the comic book that I think you pitched to me at one point. You were just like, you got to check this out at some point. Maybe we ought to talk about it. So here we are. Is there anything else you'd like to say about why you decided to go with Generation 2?
I think it's important, number one, to understand that we refer to the Transformers prior to this as Generation 1, but we wouldn't do it if there wasn't Generation 2. That's not what these Transformers were called at the time. We don't have Transformers Generation 3, 4, 5, so on. It splits into different things, you know, Beast Wars, Siege, Transformers, the animated series, the movie stuff, etc. So I think this is an important thing because otherwise it doesn't answer the question, why is there a G1? Kind of like when you was in like civics class or some shit, you do an outline, you don't put a, you can't put a B, you know, if there's no A, you know what I mean? So I think this is an overlooked era of the Transformers history. I think it's a really good comic book here. I think it turned a lot of the mythology on its head. I think Simon Furman is aside from Bob Budiansky, like, you know, they're probably equals in a way, but he's the guy. He reimagined what Transformers could be. And I think it's a good comic for the 90s. Obviously, we do the 90s stuff here. And the Transformers regular series, obviously, we talked about issue number 80. It did go into the 90s, but it's very much an 80s property. I feel like Transformers Generation 2 updated the property in a good way for the 90s to where somebody like you, Jesse, not as big a Transformers person, you can appreciate this just as a 90s comic book alone. And also, I'm in the minority here. I love the Generation 2 toys. The colors are not good. I respect that. They're bright. They're garish. Neons, green, you know. But you know what? That's what we were doing in 1992. That's when hypercolor was around. People think of the 90s as big grunge, but the early 90s were very techno. And so I feel like this goes into that. And I'm into this shit. Like, you're a big Joe fan, Jesse. I love the later Joes, Battle Force 2000, that kind of thing, which had the bright colors and weird stories. Generation 2 brings that to me as well. I would never say it's as good as Generation 1. I'm not going to do that. And I think a big problem with it is it's too similar to Generation 1, too close to Generation 1. But as it is on its own, if there was no Generation 1, I would still like this. I would still really find the comic book and the toys very, very interesting. The cartoon, it's really just the old cartoon. They threw some new bumpers on it, you know, so it is what it is there. But those are probably the big reasons. Like, basically, I just gave you a a college symposium about Generation 2. Probably said a little too much, but you know what I say, the path of excess leads to the palace of wisdom.
All right. Well, Darry, tell me about, now we're talking the comic tonight, but I mean, Generation 2 Transformers, what do you got on your mind here about what we're either going to be getting ready to discuss? Was this something that you were reading at some point, picked up, had to have? What's your thoughts about this comic or anything else in regards to it?
Yeah, so I'm a huge geek on a variety of properties, but Transformers is number one, regardless if it's the live action movies, which I don't think are nearly as bad as Dean does. I love all the cartoons.
I don't think they're bad. They're just not for me.
No. I believe me. I respect that. I have this argument with everyone, but I love them. I always say, give me more Transformers rather than less. But I actually owe all my fandom to Generation 2 because I'm a little bit on the younger side. So when this came out, I was like, oh, hey, great. They're rebooting this thing. And I didn't realize until later it was the same properties, the same characters. So yeah, Generation 2 pulled me in and made me a lifelong fan. And by the time I discovered Generation 1 and realized, oh, it's the Generation 2 stuff, it's just the originals, it was like I was hooked. This comic I did buy on the racks when I was a little kid, but I had no idea what I was reading. So I read it repeatedly as an adult. And yeah, I echo everything Dean said. This is Simon Furman, who's written the characters, I think, by volume more than anyone else. Just being like, I don't know how long this book is going to last. I told all my A stories. Let me take one B plot and just like shoot for the fences. And I think he accomplishes it. I think you can read issues 1 through 12 and you get a really good, concise Transformers comic.
As far as Generation 2 goes as well, I think this was good for you, for the slightly younger people like you're mentioning, because like when me and Jesse discussed issue number 80, the Transformers at the end got really weird. The Pretenders, Action Masters, a whole bunch of sublines, and the stuff got really cosmic and science
I wasn't
fiction-y.
lost at all.
right. But Generation 2, at least as far as the toys go, just pretty much a straight reboot, getting back to basics for somebody like you who had sort of missed out on it.
Yeah, and that's it 100%. Because if you had given me at that age an Action Master, I would have been like, no, I'm going to go back to the Ninja Turtles. Right. But someone handed me
a Terrorcon.
But someone handed me a Generation 2 Optimus Prime, which is we call it the Power Master, and I still have it. It is sitting in the bookcase behind me. So yeah, no, Dean is 100% right. They rebooted, they went back to basics, and I was able to get my hands on those, and it was like, all right, I'm going to be giving you money for the rest of my life.
Well, I know that when we came together and decided we were going to do this story, at first I was like, okay, I need to start reading and start making notes. So I grab issue 1. All right. I'm going through issue 1, and this is just kind of to set up what we're going to get into here. But now I know the Transformers and G.I. Joe have crossed in their paths plenty of times in the past. All right. What I wasn't expecting was for that to happen right here in, I think it was issue 1. They're starting to reference G.I. Joe comics. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. Okay, cool. I immediately definitely raised an eyebrow. I see that property show up. I'm excited. I want to go and read some more. So what we've done, obviously they're referencing some stuff that's happened in the Joe comics. So we're going to reference that first. We're going to talk about that first. We're just sticking to the main bulk of what happened between Megatron and Cobra Commander. All right. So Megatron shows up. We're going to talk about that, but there is a lot of other stuff that's going on in those issues. We're going to kind of leave that to the side. So obviously nobody came here to listen to us talk about G.I. Joes. They're listening to hear us talk about Transformers tonight.
Definitely the Joe saga wouldn't make a lot of sense at this point, but it is written by legendary Joe scribe Larry Hama. So if anyone's on the fence about whether or not to read these issues, absolutely do, because that guy was still trucking right along, and he's just as good, and they absolutely are worth reading. I mean, they are not throwaway issues for the Joe storyline.
I forget who penciled them, but they're beautiful as well. Like, Meta Viper is like one of the coolest characters. And I think this is one of the first times he showed up in the comics. Like, I really like that too. Like, he looks cool.
Well, I started picking out Joes that I recognized. I've recognized quite a few, but I remember getting some of that. I think it was Ninja Force line with the dude at the department store that was going out of business, and they were selling these things for like rock bottom prices. And I was like, hey, I'm 14. I still like G.I. Joes, I think. So I went and grabbed a bunch of them at that time, and I was like, oh, hey, here they are in this comic. Sweet.
Slice, dice.
Yeah. There you go. All right. So here we go. All right. So this.
Himself.
That synopsis is right around the corner, but first let me tell you about Amazon Music. You may not be able to find Starscream's crooning country album, King of My Own Castle, but you will be able to find the Cybertronic Spree's rockin' good time tune, Cybertronic Warrior. If you head to getamazonmusic.com/W2M Network, you can get a free 30-day trial where you can check out over 70 million songs. That's getamazonmusic.com/W2M Network for that free 30-day trial. This takes place between issues G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, 138 through 142. That's as far as I went. I don't think it went further than that. Okay, real quick, let's talk about the creative team for G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, issues 138 through 142. Now, all of these issues are scripted by Larry Hama, but I'll go ahead and go issue by issue on the rest of the creative team. So on issue 138, we have Andrew Wildman on breakdowns, Stephen Baskerville with the finishes, Rick Parker with the letters, and Bob Sharon with coloring. On issue 139, we have pencils by Chris Batista, Rick Parker doing lettering again. Baskerville, Williams, Hudson, and Wallace are all on the inks, and Sharon and Witterstetter are on colors for that issue. Issue 140 has Chris Batista doing the pencils, Chip Wallace doing the inks, and Bob Sharon doing the coloring. Issue 141 has Stephen Lieber and William Rosado doing pencils, Scott Moulter and Chip Wallace doing the inks, Bob Sharon doing the colors, and Rick Parker with the lettering. Finally, on issue 142, I want to do my best here because I can't suss out the credits box very well. So it's got Jesse Orozco and William Rosado listed as the pencils, Chip Wallace and Tim Tuohy as the inkers, Ariane, Steve Alexandrov, and Rick Parker as letterers, and Andre Ani and Chi behind the colors. So here we go. Megatron, still alive, still on Earth. So, well, let me stop. Because I do have to ask a question. I know that I read issue 80 of Transformers. I don't think Megatron showed up at all. So if I remember correctly, we were dealing with Bludgeon and his crazy antics and all that stuff. Well, Megatron's obviously in dire straits because he looks like crap when he shows up here in this issue. If not, that's fine.
Right after he was like attached to Ratchet and they got undetached and then like they thought he got killed, but this is the first time we see him since then.
Okay.
I remember that he was attached to Ratchet, which was a big deal because he moseyed on around for a while, connected to him by the head, and it was a really cool visual.
And very horrifying as well.
Yeah, real horror comic, like very, very much part of the UK scene type of thing.
It became like a space horror comic for about, 10 issues or so.
Yeah. I mean, you can see Simon Furman's background in the UK comics because it is not something you'd see on Saturday mornings. But my understanding, unless I missed something, is he just kind of shows up here because he had a new toy coming out and they had to figure out to get one to the other as quickly as possible, which doesn't bother me. I'm not so much for the details, but it's like, that was standard operating procedure.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the model back then. So that's exactly what they were doing.
I think also at this point, like, do you really need an explanation that Megatron's not dead anymore? Like, this would have been like the fourth or fifth time he had died. When he died, he became Galvatron died, he becomes back, like, if Megatron shows up out of nowhere looking haggard, doing stuff, I totally just buy it. Yeah, we didn't get him. Imagine that. Megatron's
still alive. All right, Megatron, still alive, still on Earth, but badly damaged, strikes a deal with the nefarious Cobra Commander to get himself repaired. Sporting a new tank transformation, Megatron promises Cobra Commander the Cybertronian spaceship, the Ark. However, in exchange, Megatron gets fitted with an advanced railgun and ownership. Well, I was going to say ownership. I don't know what to call this, but he's basically taking their brilliant scientist, Dr. Biggles Jones, hostage. I wouldn't call her hostage. She's basically so that give me that person over there. I'm going to use her brain power for something.
I think it's interesting as far as that goes, because as this goes on, Dr. Biggles Jones refers to the Transformers, particularly the Autobots, as like mirror machine. She's like, if a mirror machine can be that brave, I can too. If you notice, Megatron thinks of her the same way. Like, Megatron is like, that's just who cares? That's a fleshling. She thinks of these robots as machines, but they're more than that. And he thinks of her as like not inorganic, because that would be atomically incorrect, but as far as like a sentient being, no, he doesn't really think of her that way. And I think it's interesting to see that those two viewpoints are much more similar than you'd think until you really look at it.
Yeah, so Megatron takes her along with him. When G.I. Joe shows up to thwart Cobra's plans, reinforcements are needed, and some Autobots join the fight after they are informed their nemesis Megatron has returned. Now, I put some Autobots. It's a little hard for me to keep track. I know you guys might have something to say about who joined the fight here, so you'll have the floor. But during the fray, Megatron decides to betray Cobra Commander, like you would figure, heading into the Ark, escaping and taking Dr. Biggles-Jones with him. However, during the battle, the Autobots' human friend Spike sneaks onto the Ark, and also Autobot Skydive, if I remember correctly. And that's kind of where we end things. The main thing, obviously, is Megatron's back. He's now a tank. He's got this awesome weapon. He's taken this doctor, this brilliant scientist, hostage, if you will. Spike Witwicky. I don't know when we last saw him, but I can tell you it was cool to see him all of a sudden. He's sneaking on. Holy crap, there's Spike. He's on his way into the Ark, and then Skydive gets in there too. So Megatron's flying around the Ark, and that's kind of where we leave these G.I. Joe issues. So,
well, I mean, I think that the stuff between Cobra Commander and Megatron is really, really funny. It's funny to see, because they're pretty much exactly the same. They both are looking for the opportunity to screw the other one over. They're both sort of ruthless, except Cobra Commander is sort of naive. Like, he gives Megatron all these super weapons, and I wonder on some level, like, why Megatron needed it. Like, he had this arc, like maybe he just couldn't do it to himself. I also think it's neat the way they got Megatron there, which was like, he thought Destro's transforming castle was an actual transformer, which is actually a great way to bring them into that back into the G.I. Joe sphere, because they really hadn't done anything with them since the G.I. Joe versus the Transformers miniseries, I believe. I don't know that there really hadn't been any contact. Darry might know more about that, but I think that the interplay between those two is cool. I think looking at Megatron, the way he thinks about humanity is interesting. I'm not as big a fan of the Autobot bloodbath at the end. Like, I'm pretty sure Brawn could, why we got to kill Brawn? I like that guy. I do think they had to get Megatron over. They needed to get Megatron over in a big way. And most of the guys, like, they wouldn't have competed with Megatron on some level anyway, but this is the first part of one of the few problems I have with the Generation 2 stuff. And it starts here. Why is Steeljaw there without Blaster? Like, Steeljaw transforms into one of Blaster's cassettes. And I think, like, why is Skydive there without the rest of the aerial bots? Why is Hotspot there without the rest of the Protectobots? I don't know why these subgroups would split up, particularly considering later on, all the Dinobots are together. And, like, the Protectobots, they form Defensor, and the Aerobots form Superion. These are inherent advantages that the Autobots seemingly just squandered that I can't get my head around. But I think all in all, this is a really good lead-in. I think it's interesting that they were trying to use this title to springboard another when this title would only last about a year longer, about 14 months. Mm-hmm. G.I. Joe's last issue was 155. But all in all, it's fun, and I think that you could do a lot worse, and a lot of times Marvel did do a lot worse at the time, utilizing one property in another to spin off another comic book. In this case, I thought everything was exciting. Got Megatron over as a villain, got the G.I. Joe team over as the supporting cast they'd be in about the first half of the G2 ongoing series as well. So, I really enjoy the issues for the most part, particularly the stuff that involves the Transformers.
Okay.
Yeah, I love the fact that he shows up because he mistakes the castle as a transformer, and when he gets there, finds out that the castle is inert, and he's like, "Oh, what is this shit?" So that's I had not remembered that from the last time I read it. But this is a weird comic, but it's very much something of the 90s where there are a ton of characters in this. They don't always necessarily line up the way you expect them to, but nonetheless, the plot gets moved forward. I love the fact that Megatron shows up, and to Dean's point, he's very similar to the character of Cobra Commander. I mean, you could see that on the two shows. But by the end of the arc, he's got a brand new body, he's got a brand new alt mode, he's got this human companion he's going to take into space, he's got this amazing gun. Like, they've built the new toy for him. And I like that came out of Cobra, because that was kind of the G.I. Joe books way of saying, like, hey, Cobra are still capable of stuff, and now they're going to have access access to whatever they glean from Megatron's superhead. So I definitely think that, to Dean's point, they were looking to build up both books. Definitely from the events of Transformers Generation 2, they have a very clear Earth presence. So I kind of like the way that it was saying, like, hey, listen, we're in the 90s. These toys aren't selling the way they were, but the comics are still here. We can tell a pretty interesting story. So yeah, I was on board. Reading these was a dream. And before we were talking about the artist, but yeah, this is Andrew Wildman, and he is great. I mean, he, especially for the time period we're talking about, 1993, his stuff holds up. I mean, even reading it now, it's like, this is better than some of the stuff that IDW is putting out.
Okay, so going back and reading these Joe issues, I again was taken back to my childhood, because this was, even though I love the Joes, it's been a while since I've seen a lot of these characters. And just like you said, dude, there is a ton of them in here. The Joes and the Transformers. I mean, we see the good thing is it's not like they just throw an Autobot on the page and not give him a way of figuring out what his name is and who it's supposed to be. Yeah, there was a lot to follow when it came to who was what, but I mean, your main characters, obviously, they got that across pretty easily, and who these main players are and what the plot was going to be. Is Hotspot the one that looks like Optimus Prime? Is that right?
Yeah, he's the fire truck from the
He's the
Protector.
fire truck.
I know he's going to show up here later, but I just remember, like, oh, here's Prime. What the heck is Prime doing here? Wait a second. And I was like, oh, okay, I got it.
Listen, give them 5 minutes. They'll make a fire truck Optimus Prime.
It's a good primer for what we're getting ready to get into for Generation 2, because it's referenced quite a bit. And it's cool to see, again, like I said, it's cool to see these two properties actually mingling once again.
I think another neat thing about this, too, is, we talk about Megatron's new look, but these books, I don't want to get too much of the G.I. Joe side, but it was also like, this launched Ninja Force. This was the launch of, like, Zarkan's new look, Storm Shadow's new look, the whole Ninja Force character line. So it's really interesting how it's kind of like a double pilot, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For G.I. Joe, it was really interesting because there was a line in here where it was like, oh, I think it was in here. I could be misremembering it, but it's like, Prime said, make sure you kill yourselves other than get caught. And it's like, that does not sound like Optimus Prime. Where did that come from?
No kidding. I missed that. Wow.
It might have been in the first part of the Generation 2.
That's in issue 3 of Generation 2. Hotspot and the Cobras get into it. But yeah, you're right. It was a very non-Prime directive, and I don't think it was stated in the G.I. Joe issues, but it was sort of understood. Also, one of the things that I find interesting is the G.I. Joe comic book goes on, right? And nothing after, even the G2 stuff doesn't really get mentioned in it. But like in the G2 book, like Earth is pretty much destroyed.
Oh, yeah, dude.
Like it is just like ravaged. I mean, like Octopunch is just doing whatever he wants because he's Octopunch. And, I don't know. I think it's interesting how, like, in the G2 book, they're drawing, like, cordons off around Washington, D.C., and they're trying to defend the White House. I don't know. In the G.I. Joe book, they're doing, like, Star Brigade stuff, Ninja Force stuff. And it's interesting. It almost makes you wonder if the G2 stuff takes place in a different universe than the G.I. Joe and the Transformers stuff.
I don't know if you guys have read this. This might be getting deep into the weeds, but Generation 2 ends on a cliffhanger that's eventually continued by Simon Furman in stuff that's not technically canon. And it really goes like really deep into Transformer lore. And I almost wonder if Dean's right, if at this point it's just like, you know what, this is its own story and its own continuity. Long gone are the days where Spider-Man or Circuit Breaker or S.H.I.E.L.D. are going to show up. Like this is its own thing. The writing's on the wall. Let's just go. Let's just do a Final Crisis story where we burn all our bridges and tell the best story we can, which is one of the reasons I like it. Because while, it would have been nice to have G.I. Joe show up later, at the same time, it was like, oh man, you are leaving nothing on the field with this. And that kind of, I appreciated that.
Wanted to pop in real quick and just give some credits for these 6 issues that we are about to get into. So all stories were written or scripted by Simon Furman, with Starkings and Gotchell on lettering and Sarah Mossif on colors. The art varies throughout the 6 issues. Derek Yaniger and Manny Galland switch duties throughout some of them, with showings in issue 2 by Andrew Wildman and Jeff Sr. You can find Jim Amash and Marie Severin on inks in most of the issues, with some help of Stephen Baskerville in issue 2. So there's your creative team. And again, these 6 issues are cover dated from November of 1993 through April of 1994. Now, this next synopsis, I'm doing 3 issues. So Transformers Generation 2, issues 1 through 3. A team of Autobots led by Grimlock are trying to protect the people of a distant planet from what they believe is a Decepticon threat. Behind this attack is a, we'll just say Transformer by the name of Jahaxis, okay? Who is confounded that the Autobots are a continued thorn in his plan to reform these planets into Cybertron-like worlds. Meanwhile, Optimus Prime is suffering from visions that he believes are warnings of things to come. When Jahaxis engages Prime and the Autobots, he is able to take the Autobots prisoner, explaining his position to Prime. Jahaxis is attempting to give the Cybertronians worlds to live on. He also gives Prime a reason to question his unending war against those of his own race. Grimlock assures him that it was the Autobots who have a purpose to stand up for those who cannot, against Jahaxis and others with plans to exterminate those that are unlike them. Prime and the Autobot, they're able to escape Jahaxis. Some time passes, and the next time we see Jahaxis and Prime, they're facing off with each other on an unnamed planet. As their respective forces fight as well, Jahaxis and Prime begin to discuss the warlike nature of Cybertronians. As both realize that there appears to be a parasite that is fueling their rage, they decide to stay their instincts to battle one another for now, and Jahaxis and Optimus call their forces off. As the two armies depart, Jahaxis is troubled by his tyrannical past that he has tried to leave behind, and the encounter with Optimus Prime now is causing him to question if he has ever left it at all. However, he believes that as long as the Autobots are still around, he will also continue to question himself. On Earth, Hotspot is still attempting to assist the Joes in defeating Cobra. During a mission to destroy a convoy carrying some Cybertronian tech, Hotspot is trapped and sacrifices himself in an explosion to keep Cobra from also getting his body. In the Ark, Megatron believes he has escaped and is pondering his next move when a stowaway, at Spike, tries to stop him by taking control of a heavily damaged Fortress Maximus. Am I right there? Is that what he tries to do?
He doesn't take control of him. He is Fortress Maximus because Fortress Maximus is the headmaster, and Fortress Maximus can't be Fortress Maximus if Spike doesn't transform into his head and put it on. It doesn't work. So they're separate beings, but they're also together. Kind of like Venom, to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good analogy.
Makes sense. It makes sense because you see the Fortress Maximus, or the body of Fortress Maximus, laying there without a head. I knew Spike was a headmaster. So he becomes Fortress Maximus, who, like I said, the body looks like it's pretty rough. It's been beat up. As he battles with Megatron, he's soon overpowered, but Skydive intervenes, giving Spike enough time to reach the antimatter core of the Ark. Believing Megatron absolutely cannot have control of the Ark, Spike sacrifices himself to cause an overload of the core. As Skydive is able to grab Dr. Biggles-Jones, they fly out of the Ark as it explodes in the night sky. Oh, and the evil Decepticon Bludgeon and that crazy crew of his are still out in space, floating around, stripping ships of their valuables. Bludgeon is building an army, but needs the spark of life from Optimus, so he plans to head to Earth to set a trap to lure him in. All right, now I got
Kato.
a lot out there.
I do think, going back to the G.I. Joe issues for a minute, they end flat because here goes Megatron, got everything he wants with this kidnap, and everybody's just kind of like, shit happened. You know what I mean? And it's good that these issues rectify that, because it felt a little odd that did he take off with Dr. Biggles-Jones? It's great to see Fortress Maximus again for the 8 seconds we get him. I'm a big Fortress Maximus fan. It is a holy grail of mine to one day own any Fortress Maximus, but both the old ones and the new ones cost $500. And it really, if you're not willing to spend $500, you cannot have a Fortress Maximus. You got to settle for Metroplex, y'all.
I want to ask a quick question.
Go ahead.
So Fortress Maximus, now I remember that toy. It's huge, right?
Yeah,
am I right?
It's like an Autobot city, pretty much.
Fortress Maximus is battling Megatron. I can't remember. I don't have the pages in front of me, but I didn't get that sense of scale.
So in the comics, it was played a little differently. All of the super tall or super giant ones, they're kind of just drawn to be in scale with the others.
Okay.
I don't know if you saw what we're going to call the Generation 1 cartoon. He's massive. He doesn't really have a personality. He's closer to Metroplex, or he's closer to Omega Supreme. But yeah, the comics, and Marvel did a series called Headmasters, miniseries 1 through 4. They're pretty much in scale with the other Transformers. But just like Megatron turning into a gun that someone else can hold, when Fortress Maximus transforms, he's a giant, battle station, a fortress, an impregnable fortress, what have you. So they definitely, I don't know if they got PIM particles or what's going on, but right. Yeah, they rapidly change scale when they go to their alt mode.
I think it was explained once, it's kind of like a subspace atomic matter shifter thing, but it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have have to. But yeah, in the Transformers comics, there are 3 sizes, basically. There's the guys who are the cassettes, there's almost everybody else, and then there's the combiners. And that's pretty much it. You know, Omega Supreme, kind of close to the combiners, not quite. But like you said, everybody else, whether it's Metroplex, Trypticon, Fortress Maximus, they're all about the same size as Soundwave or Starscream or anybody like that.
Yeah, so we see Spike in Fortress Maximus. I mean, we are to assume that he's dead. I mean, Spike's a huge player, in my opinion, on the Transformers that I grew up on, anyway.
See, that's funny too, because if you had been reading the Generation 1 comics, like the main character in the comics is called Buster.
Right.
Yeah, and it wasn't for a while. I remember reading those and being like, Buster, okay, that's weird, but he's the same characters from the show. It's just he's got another stupid nickname. But then later on in the Generation 1 comics, Spike shows up. And I don't know if that was Hasbro or Simon Furman or someone being like, hey, can you, make this match the comic? So Spike showing up here, I actually wasn't sure for a couple of pages because they just call him, he calls himself Witwicky. I was like, was this Buster? I don't remember. And then it's Spike and he turns into Fort Max. But yeah, him being lost here was almost funny. It was like, man, Spike can get no respect in the comics. You know, Buster was the main character for a while. He comes in, he gets killed in a crossover, and literally no one mourns him for the rest of these 12 issues.
Right. I can't say for certain, but probably what happened is either the cartoon or the comic book, probably more likely the cartoon because Marvel made a bunch of this mythology at the start. Somebody got the wrong information, like this guy was going to be Buster. They changed the name to Spike or vice versa. Because if you look at the history of the licensed animated comics, G.I. Joe, like if you look at the early G.I. Joe stuff doesn't match up. The Thundercats comics doesn't match up. The He-Man shit is all over the place.
Yeah.
There is no telling like what anybody had because I think at the time it wasn't seen as important. Very similar to like when you would ask Stan Lee or Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko who did what, and you get Don Heck's opinion, Flo Steinberg's opinion. Nobody fucking knows because nobody really kept up with it. So what you had is you had development in one area, the comics, you had the toy development, which then split off into a million different developments because most of it was just Japanese toys licensed. And then you had the cartoon development, and somewhere, believe it or not, those wires got crossed.
A lot of people are showing back up that I love to see, especially Bludgeon.
Bludgeon's great. I don't care what anybody says. Bludgeon's cool.
Yeah.
Darry, why don't you weigh in on Jahaxis here?
Yeah, so Jax is one of those characters that I didn't find all that interesting the first time I read it because it's like, okay, great, you got a bunch of unusable soldiers. I can't tell them apart. You don't have a toy. Like that's the big thing to me is if you're going to be a main character and I don't have a toy of you, it's like that's kind of weird. And this guy didn't get a toy until years and years later. But I like him more now, and the reason for that is I don't know if anyone else went through this. To me, he's the MCU Thanos. Like especially later on, like he is all about his armies and his troops, and he's got a higher power he keeps going on about. He just wants to, take out anyone who doesn't fit his profile. He's not afraid of the heroes, but he has respect for them. He wants to fight them in an open field. And I just halfway through reading these, I started hearing Josh Brolin's voice, and the character finally clicked for me. And now I may have to go out and actually get that toy after all these years.
For me, it's funny when you say that because like I read it at the time and liked it at the time, and it sounds like I was a little older than you. Like I was picking these up, I would probably have been like 14, so it's probably a little more in my wheelhouse. And you mentioned Thanos and everything. I saw him more like he's trying to go to the Galactus route. He's beyond good and evil. It's not like you guys are antiquated. I see your MCU Thanos though, because I think the MCU Thanos and Galactus are actually very similar in that if you ask Thanos in the MCU, if you ask Marvel Universe Thanos if he's evil, he's gonna start like juggling skulls and his like eyes are gonna glow and he's gonna talk about Mr. Death. The MCU one's like, I'm not really evil, man. This is what has to be done.
Yeah.
And I feel like Galactus is similar. Galactus is. Darkseid also, although Darkseid's decidedly evil, but like I feel like G-Axis is like Darkseid or Galactus in that he's just like, this is the natural order of things. I'm just trying to promulgate it. You're the throwbacks. You're the ones who don't get what's happened. You're the ones who won't get with the times. So yeah, it's an interesting converse, and I totally see it. I thought it's funny because this is one of the more polemical things that a lot of Transformers fans don't like. And
Really?
Darry's probably seen this on message boards. They don't like this idea that the war is over. They're all Cybertronians now, and things like moved along. And I guess because it maybe takes some of the sexiness away from some of it. But to me, when you add in like Spike's death, Hotspot's death, Brawn's death, Steeljaw's death, etc., early on in the comics, it gave you a reinforcement that this comic book played for keeps. That everything, not just the characters dying, which would have been enough to kind of instill that in you, but even the very concepts that you held dear to your heart in regard to the Transformers, nothing was off limits. We could nullify those. There was no part of this mythology that was sacrosanct anymore. The characters could die, and their philosophies could be shown to be possibly outdated. That having been said, Jax is wrong. He's decidedly evil, just like Thanos in the MCU. And I love Grimlock, where he's like, "No, Prime, I can't believe you're being this way." Because I love Grimlock, and I love the self-doubt Grimlock has through this, and I love how he finds himself as a leader as this goes along. And I love that moment where he's like, maybe we see too small a picture, but the Decepticons see too big a picture. Remember what we learned on Earth. Like the humans, these people are no different. The planets, wherever there's life, it's no different than us. What a great speech from what a great character who normally just says munch metal.
I agree. And one of the other things I liked about G-Axis was, again, now that I had a better appreciation for what he was going for, is I like the fact that nothing can be taken for granted, which again, based on the fact that this started out as a toy and a cartoon, really was the exception to the rule, and you can tell they're getting to the end of the line. But one of the things I liked is this villain is essentially like, your little tiny war doesn't really matter. I come from a place where I have beaten enemies far out of scale of you. And it was similar to, like, I don't know if you guys are Trekkies, but like in Deep Space Nine, they introduced the concept of the Dominion. Or in the Star Wars Expanded Universe in the 90s, they had the Yuzan Vong. Just this idea of like, your battle seems big to you guys because you don't know any better, but there is a giant force with unlimited resources that is on its way here. And if you don't put your differences aside, it's just going to steamroll all of you. And I love seeing this because it was like, oh, yeah, Prime has problems with Megatron. How's he going to beat this guy with planets and systems full of soldiers who are loyal to him? So I agree. I loved the enhancement of the scale of this.
Yeah, the point that this book really made me sit up and go, okay, we're getting something different here, was when Jahaxis and Prime were battling each other and they decide to stop. Right. That's not where I was like, we got to up the ante with a bigger, badder villain, and now they're just going to continue to fight. And that's not what happens. They stop and they talk. And I was like, okay, now we're going to get somewhere, because we're actually going to really think about what both of these characters are doing and what they've been doing. And I like that, because not only does Optimus come away with that first conversation thinking about, what am I doing? Why am I in this war? What should I be doing with myself, for my people, from a Cybertron? And then it's not like Jahaxis walks away just going, yeah, I'm right, and I'm always going to be right. He's walking away going, man, I've tried to leave that all behind. They allude to it here. They don't really, I can't remember if they do the flashback in this one or it's later issues, but they talk about this dude had a past where he was a tyrant, and he's trying at least to get away from it, but now he's starting to realize maybe he hasn't. He thought that he was doing something completely different.
Well, I think when you remember the Parasite issue, what you wind up with is like that moment where they're fighting the parasites, and God bless Hound, because without him, I don't know. You know what I mean? He figured it out quickly. It's funny. The army jeep was like, "Hey, man, maybe we shouldn't fight." He's the one who figured it out. It's kind of ironic, if you will. But I think that issue is like a metaphor for the whole thing. That the only real way that these Cybertronians, whether they're Geaxises or Megatrons or the Autobots, is at some point they're going to have to decide to stop fighting. At some point, this war can't go on forever. Now, obviously, it can, as long as Hasbro is making money in the real world. But if you think about like a real world war, if you think about like, from a philosophical and from a material and from just a want standpoint, wars don't go on forever in the real world for a lot of reasons. At some point, you have to stop fighting and figure out what it is that you want. I think that Parasite issue was a really good metaphor for that. So if G-Hyxis, in the future issues does have redemption, it can be tied back to that, where everybody, I think, kind of realized what the real answer was, except Megatron, who wasn't there there who will never learn any lessons, as evidenced by the fact that, he brings Starscream back at some point. So.
Yeah,
You'll never learn any lessons. Megatron, we can just say that definitively.
Yeah, the only thing I want to say as a pronounced fan of 90s comics is if you flip through this first issue, from the hollow foil transforming
beautiful
gatefold cover to all the artwork inside by Derek Yaniger, this thing it almost seems like a parody if it didn't come out in 1993, because you have Autobots wearing bandoliers, there's shell casings, there's double page spreads. I mean, it was a dream to read through, because it's just like, the Transformers may be an 80s property, as was mentioned, but Generation 2 could only have come out in 1993, 1994 when it did. And it's one of these things where it's like, man, we're still fans of these characters today. People still buy these toys. They're still talking about them. There's going to be new cartoons. But for one brief second, there were weird guns mounted on every possible surface, like in every other comic. And everyone had little, pouches and bandoliers like they were being drawn by Liefeld. So I love it. As a fan of this time period, I love flipping through these. I still have my hard copy, so I just think it's great.
That is one of the best gimmick covers, too, of the era. Like, it all makes sense. It looks great. I feel like the way the book is colored and the way the lettering's done, it almost feels like a UK comic. And then you throw in the fact that Simon Furman, who is from the UK, is writing it. And I mean that in a good way. It just feels, even juxtaposed with the stuff that I know people make fun of, the big guns, the pouches, the bandoliers. And I don't care what anybody says, but that moment where Megatron's running down the hall firing guns, amazing. Yeah. He's like, Megatron is back! And he's like blowing everybody away. I think when you juxtapose that with like that style of coloring, the way Simon Furman writes, the way it's lettered, it really feels more like an advanced UK comic of the time. Like something you might even have seen in 2000 AD. It would have been a little raunchier in 2000 AD, but I don't think it would have been out of place. Like it has that feel, and I mean that in a good way.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of the artwork reminds me of two, especially in the later issues, two UK artists I'm a huge fan of. One is Simon Bisley and the other one is Kevin O'Neill. Like this just has very UK feel. And I mean that in the best way. I really do. Reading through this, it's like, well, it makes sense. A lot of this team worked on the Transformers UK comic, which was long running and very successful in its own way. But yeah, I mean, you read this and some of these jaw lines, it's like, oh man, when are the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen going to show up? And I love that. That is nothing but the highest compliment I can give.
Yeah, great to mention Bisley. It does have a Bisley feel.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I did like how in the first issue here, you talk about the lettering and the caption boxes. It was just an interesting flair for them to have the, like, it almost looks like a code of some sort on the side of the speech bubble. I don't know if you remember that, but it has like different colors, different colored boxes. There's no rhyme or reason to it other than just to kind of give it that techno feel almost, and which I really, really liked. That's one thing that set it apart. And I do see the UK influence that you guys are talking about, because it is just looking at the faces of each Autobot or each Transformer and their snarls just really, really sets itself apart. Transformers Generation 2 issues 4 through 6. The Autobot Grimlock is tired of waiting on Prime to take action against G-Axis. Taking some other Autobots, he attacks, but he and his army are soon taken prisoner. Optimus and some others show up to rescue them, and when they are finally free, Optimus informs them that he has to head to Cybertron as his visions are getting stronger and he needs help understanding the warning that the Matrix is giving him. Optimus gets to Cybertron, and with the help of some, look, I just called them Cybertronian mystics. I have no idea what these guys are, but they're helping him through his trying to figure out what these visions are. So with the help of these Cybertronian mystics, he is warned that his visions are of a coming apocalypse. He watches the history of his race unfold and begins to understand that not all of them began as one race at the same time, but generations of new Cybertronians spawned from old ones until one day the generations just stopped and they forgot that this could occur. But Prime also sees that all Transformers, and I say all Transformers, have the ability to create new generations. It's just locked away. Prime then realizes that Gehaxis is a new generation of Cybertronian, I think. However, Optimus believes that Cybertronians may not have been meant to remember how to bring about a new generation of race because Cybertronians, specifically Decepticons, may take over the galaxy. Understanding this, Prime is intent on preventing it from occurring and heads to Earth. I put heads to Earth. That's where I assumed he was going, because that's where we're going to see him next. Meanwhile, Gehaxis is preparing another world for eco-structuring and is concerned why the Autobots are not attacking. So he's thinking, well, these guys are up to something, and trying to stop them, while Autobot Hot Rod is upset that they aren't going after Gehaxis. On Earth, Bludgeon and his crew have arrived, wreaking havoc upon the planet with the hopes of getting the attention of Optimus Prime. Instead, they get a visit from Megatron and Starscream. So I'm stopping right here just real quick. Either one of you pipe up. Darry, I'll let you go first if you have any idea. Where the hell did Megatron go and find Starscream? Is that in another book, or is it just like, hey, Starscream's back?
The only thing that I could figure out is that when Megatron shows up at the beginning of the G.I. Joe issues that we discussed, he is speaking with someone. So I assumed that was Starscream. And again, I feel like, just having consumed as much Transformer media as I did, I didn't question it and said, all right, listen, Megatron's got a new toy. I'm sure Starscream had a new toy at the time. These are marquee characters they got to get back as quickly as possible. And it's a question of like, well, how much real estate are you going to have Larry Hama or Simon Furman waste on this? Starscream's coming back. You want him to come back. So I just kind of ran with it. Now, there is discussion later on about, well, why did you bring him back of particular instance?
My man Soundwave. Not
happy.
And it's funny, too, because I know I'm beating this drum pretty hard. But again, my brain, and it's a different character, goes back to Thanos. And in the comics, they always used to say, well, he's going to be his own downfall. He's always going to cause something to allow him to not accomplish his goal, even though he gets closer than everyone else. And I feel like that's true with Megatron, too. It's like through the whole G1, whether it was the comic or the cartoon, you have this obviously duplicitous guy as your right-hand man. I don't care how good of a fighter he is, he's going to shoot you the first chance he gets, and you keep bringing him back. You have your Iago, and it's like, why? And I feel like that's just a fundamental part of Megatron's character. That's like, I can't be here without someone telling me how great I am, even if I know he doesn't mean it, and he's going to try to kill me.
Yeah, so I think that's part of it, is that, Megatron is just so into lording it over. I think he likes it more to make Starscream say how great he is, knowing that Starscream doesn't believe that and doesn't want to. It's a reaffirmation of Megatron's power. Ultimately, like for me, I just thought it was like, hey, Starscream's back. And much like I said about Megatron, I don't fucking question it. This is a guy who died at least 3 or 4 times in the 80-issue first series. He died in the movie. He came back. You remember Starscream's ghost in, season 3? So, this is a guy who we know he can come back to life. He just does. We have to accept, too, when we talk about death, and obviously the Transformers are humanistic, much like us, but death doesn't quite mean the same thing for somebody that's made out of circuits, for somebody whose personality could literally be put into a chip. Now, I'm not Dr. Bigglesjones being like, what, me a machine? That's not true. But much like your brain is like basically a whole lot of electrical reactions happening at the same time, that's like almost literally what they are. And if those things can be replicated, why can't you bring Starscream back to life? And again, like you said, Darry, a lot of it is just like, it is part of Megatron's weakness. I think his weakness isn't necessarily Starscream in particular, but it's that idea that he wants people who he wants the Transformers, and he wants things that he perceives to be lesser beings that he knows hates him to worship him and give him adulation. And if that means that they're also treacherous, that's the price he pays. He doesn't realize that the price he's really paying is defeat.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that about the life and death, because one thing we didn't talk about with the first 3 issues was there's this weird Halloween special that's included with the first 3 issues. It's in issue 2, and it was solicited as an issue 0. And they say that. They say something along the lines of, we as Cybertronians, we really can't die. We're functionally immortal. And even if we get killed, we can usually get, put back together and whatnot. And they almost say something like, how weird it must be for you humans to have to know that's coming and deal with that on a regular basis. So yeah, the fact that these characters do die so often and then come back, the fact that the other characters don't really seem to would be all that surprised, I feel like makes sense within the story, even if it's just kind of like, the editor's way of explaining the fact that they needed these characters back because it was a mandate from the IP holder, basically.
Right.
Okay.
What a weird Halloween special too. Like, who's that for? Like, that's not for kids, which is normally what you do with Halloween special. It was already in an issue, so like you and me don't need it. Like, what was this about? Like, like if you were buying the regular issues, you got it. If you were a kid, you'd just be creeped the fuck out because it's a creepy story. I don't know. It's interesting that it was made. I wonder whose call that was. Hopefully somebody out there will hear this. Simon Furman, we're friends on Facebook. I'm going to post this. Going to tag you. You tell me about it.
All right.
I feel like 1993 was so weird, especially at Marvel, because it's like, you read some of the stories about that time and it's like you have to put out as much product as we don't care if it's good, it's got to be out there and it's got to be something we could potentially make a toy of. Or that might have been a little bit later with Toy Biz. But I feel like someone was like, Halloween's coming up, we're promoting this Transformers book, get that thing out there, we're gonna put it in someone's hands. And it's so indicative of the time. This is like, right before the Spider-Man Clone Saga would start, before these crossovers would ramp up. Like, they just wanted to get as much product into the market as possible. And I feel like repackaging that quote-unquote ghost story as a Halloween special was like, it made sense at the time. Now it's kind of ridiculous, but it did make sense at the time.
No, that makes sense. Absolutely. And you're right, because Marvel at that time as a corporate entity was publicly traded, and they had acquired Skybox, they had acquired Fleer. I think this is around the time they got Panini. And like, they really could, if you go back and look, Ron Perlman didn't pay for any of this stuff. He used leveraged buyouts that he used Marvel sales to like use as a collateral to get those leveraged buyouts. Because if you look at this time, that was really the only part of the company that was making big money. The trading cards would have, but you don't need two companies. I don't understand it. Like, if you read like Comic Wars, it talks about what a weird series of missteps were made. But one thing is right, Darry, they did pump out as much product as they could because this is the only way they could guarantee that revenue could be generated. Like, they weren't going to put it. Panini's only going to put out so many stickers. That's it. But like, as far as IP goes, there was tons to spin off. You could get Punisher 3 titles. There'd be 6 X books, what have you, etc. And we'll get the Transformers going again. Get it on the shelf. So great point as far as that goes.
Yeah. All right. Well, so Megatron and Starscream are back, and Bludgeon's not too happy about that.
So he won't have to worry about that very long.
No, he does not. Bludgeon attacks Megatron, and he's able to handle them pretty easily, destroying Bludgeon, taking his head as a prize. Now, acquiring and touring Bludgeon's ship, Megatron has shown Bludgeon's progress in making an army and is pleased at what he has stumbled upon. Finally, Optimus Prime arrives to help G.I. Joe against the constant assault of the Decepticons. However, his plan to stop Megatron is to try to convince him to understand the larger threat of Gehaxus. When Optimus faces off with Megatron, guess what? Megatron will not listen. Consumed with the intent to take the Matrix from Optimus to power his army, he rips open Prime's chest to take his prize, and just as Megatron is about to kill Prime, guess who shows up, Dean? Grimlock and the rest show up to
give
save
credit
him.
where credit due. This is my party.
During the battle, the Decepticons escape to their ship, leaving Optimus to be repaired by the Autobot. In a short epilogue, we see a black cybernetic swarm that we actually caught a glimpse of, I think, in issue 5, approach some aliens on a distant planet. They suck the life from their bodies, leaving nothing but their bones behind before flying off. So we're gonna kind of getting some more information on this black swarm, and it looks cybernetic. I put that in there. It definitely looks like it's composed of some technology, but we'll find out more of that there when we get into the next issues. But all right, first off, okay, Darry, I need you to make sure that my explanation for Optimus's revelation of, or vision, if you will, of the generations, did I describe that right? Or give me your take on it. What the hell was going on?
Yeah, I think you described it very well. I got to be completely honest with you. I have no idea what's going on. And,
okay.
and
yeah, think about it when we were reading Transformers 80. And remember I told you, I love Simon Furman, but sometimes it gets into cosmic mumbo jumbo.
Oh, man.
And like, you just kind of have to accept it. It's like when the Living Tribunal's talking to, the in-betweener, and you couldn't possibly understand this.
The way I read it, and I think it's consistent if you get to the end, though I don't think that was maybe what he intended to begin with, is I just imagine him, Furman sitting there and going, all right, the book is called Generation 2, and as Dean pointed out before, we didn't have the term Generation 1, right? That would come later. That was fan brand. rebranding. And he's like, well, okay, wait a second. There's really only one generation of Transformers. They all showed up one day. They came from Primus, the god, the world, and there is no generation two. And he just sits there and is like, well, what if there is a generation two?
Right.
And yeah, this whole talk about memory wipes and budding and everything else, it's like, okay, that's great. But my main takeaway was, oh, okay, there were more Transformers after you started your war, left this planet, and were locked on Earth. And one of the people who you left behind who didn't care about your war went off into space, with his friends, G-Axis, and they formed the Cybertronian Empire. And they're the next generation because they don't have anything to do with you guys. And I really like that because, again, it was a comment on the fact that, like, yeah, you have this war, and to Dean's point, like, what are you fighting for? But also, like, your war is tiny. Like, the universe is infinite. And look what your peers, your kids, really, your descendants did when they didn't have you standing over them yelling at them. Like, they've conquered an unlimited number of worlds. And the other thing, too, is that G-Axis's troops are really loyal. The other thing that I did like, though, is Furman really goes into this idea of, like, how do Transformers reproduce? And again, that's not something I ever really cared about. But I do like the idea that at some point they could just make more of themselves. Because up until now, that was really, like, gate kept. Like, you had to come from the planet itself. The planet was sentient, or someone with the Matrix had to turn you on. So I did like the idea of saying, well, wait a second, maybe that was all crap. Maybe there are more ways to make this. Maybe transforming life exists in ways you can't possibly imagine. Because not only does that, poke the imagination, it allows for much cooler toys.
Yeah, for sure. Dean, anything to add on that?
Well, one thing I want to say is I think we missed the part where Grimlock and his guys get captured, and Optimus Prime has to save them, and like we lose Red Alert and Mirage. And I think Mirage is like a big deal. Like Mirage is like one of the first Transformers. He's always in every one of them. He hunts turbo foxes. I like that about him. He's a snotty guy. I enjoy that. I think he's funny. I think he's a good character. And he's somebody who they can always count on. He's kind of a Deus Ex Machina with his Mirage power. Like, sometimes he's invisible, but sometimes he just looks like Megatron. And, like, they killed him, during Grimlock's attack. And, when they're busting out in Optimus Prime. And I like the part where, like, Optimus Prime is like, listen, he talks to Grimlock, and Grimlock's like, yeah, I failed. I got those guys killed. Like, the only thing you did wrong was not kidnap a whole crew. He's like, it sucks that they died, but shit happens, man. You're a great leader. So I love, again, it really advances that Grimlock inferiority complex, and not just advances it, but I think by the end of the Generation 2 run, it's sort of gone. It's completely, he's very sure of himself in a way that he never was, like in the G1 issues where like he became the leader and just becomes a super tyrant, and I really appreciate that development. One of the things I super like about it is once Bludgeon's crew shows up, goddamn, Octopunch is everywhere. And I'm sorry, I love Octopunch. All right, I just love Octopunch. What a name, what a look. I don't care about anything in regard to whatever he's done, his backstory. He's like the Sid Vicious of the Transformers to me. All he has to do is look good. That's it. He just looks like he's just a cool Transformer. He got a deep sea diver's helmet on. Listen, I'm sorry, I'm very excited. But Octopunch, one of the things that like I complained about when we did in issue number 80, you don't get to see a lot of favorites. Even if they're getting blown away, G2's giving you a lot of the old favorites. Like I said, Octopunch is a big one for me, but my number one favorite Transformer of all time, Soundwave, as this goes on, he takes a bigger and bigger role.
Okay,
and
cool.
I love Soundwave. I have probably, 40, maybe 45 different Soundwave things, big ones, small ones, cassettes, statues, whatever. I love him, and so it's great to see him more. I think that they advanced the story really well. I think that the Optimus Prime trying to talk to Megatron trope gets done a little bit too much, but it's done well here. And wow, I think it reinforces too that Megatron, like you said about Thanos, has to defeat himself, because you look almost every time they go one-on-one, like Megatron just destroys this guy, and he really rips him. He literally rips him apart here. So I really enjoy that of it too. Where we see just how out Optimus Prime isn't just outnumbered when he comes to G-Axis, but he's also outclassed at this point with Megatron's upgrade. So and also they do a great job, despite the fact that there's a lot of conflict right now. You just know these guys are going to get together. You just know it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always liked that fact. I think that's one of the reasons Optimus is really had such staying power. Like, he is not a soldier. Like, Megatron turns into a gun. He's got a gun on his arm, turns into a tank. He was a gladiator. He could fly. Like, he is an aggressive soldier. He's your classic tyrannical character. And Optimus is not. He turns into a truck. He delivers things. And that's why it makes it so interesting. Because, yeah, I'm with Dean. I absolutely think in a street fight, he's going to lose. And that's why it's so cool in the original movie with the scene with Hot Rod, and I won't spoil it for the three of you listening to this who haven't seen the original movie, but yeah, I agree, and I always love that Prime, regardless of the fact that his men look upon him like God, he is the underdog, and I love that here. It's like he's got to find another way to take this guy down, to take Megatron down, because he's not going to be able to outshoot him. The Decepticons are made for war, the Autobots aren't. And also the other thing that I like about Prime and these comics in general, why I still am interested in the mythology, regardless of the fact that I'm adult, is the fact that the Autobots aren't trying to conquer anything. Their whole thing is like, no, we just want to stop you from killing everyone else, and we'd like it if, we could go home. Like that. Yeah. That's a very simple thing. Like the Autobots are saying war is bad. You're saying war is good. We don't want to kill anyone. We just want the fighting to stop, which is why I really like the next franchise in the series, which is Beast Wars, which opens up with this story being closed and basically saying, hey, there was peace for a while and they did win. So you at least know, as a long-term fan of this nonsense, that there is a little period of time where everyone had like Cybertronian baby boomers, if you will.
Okay.
I really like what you said about Optimus Prime not being a soldier, because because when you think about it, absolutely true. Ultra Magnus is the soldier. Ultra Magnus is like this incredible military mind. Like he wants to fight, but also he's a lot like Prime. He doesn't want to fight because like fighting's awesome. He's like, we have to fight. Like that's why we got to do it. Yeah. And honestly, I feel like Generation 2, one of the things that it's lacking is I feel like I wish Ultra Magnus was in it. I feel like he would add something to this.
The characters they leave out in this, really surprising to me. And again, I didn't go back and reread the back half of the Generation 1 comic.
Yeah, he could be dead. I don't remember.
Yeah, if anyone is listening to this, it's not called Generation 1. It's literally just called Marvel's The Transformers. There is another Generation 1 comic that comes later. But yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of characters left on the cutting room floor here that I would have loved to have seen gotten the Starscream treatment of just put them in, because your days are numbered, guys. And
who are like your top 2 or 3?
My favorite Transformer of all time, and I couldn't tell you why, is Ironhide. Between the Peter Cullen voice, the fact that I had his toy, he was one of the few G1 Transformers I actually did have. I loved him. I love that he was tough and a little bit more rumbly, but he definitely, he's voiced by Peter Cullen. He sounded like Optimus Prime, and he would just get in there and he would lose it. And then later on, I found out he was one of the few Transformers who actually had a girlfriend in Chromia, who, for those of you who don't know, Ironhide turns into a minivan and his girlfriend turns into like this soccer mom thing. And I always just thought, like, you know what? That's great. I'm glad he settled down. So no, Ironhide is my favorite. On the Decepticon side, it's always been Starscream. His voice actor, Chris Latta, who did Cobra Commander in the original cartoon, is like the one celebrity who I never got to meet because unfortunately he passed away. I have as many Starscream toys as you do Soundwave. Like whenever I see something with his form, I'm like, nope, I got to have that. I'm going to regret not buying it.
It's funny because like your favorite's like, oh, I like this guy because he's scheming and disloyal. But I like Soundwave because he is loyal. I like Soundwave. It's because I'm like, Soundwave is utterly dependable, and I love that about him. And I love, and I think his equivalent in G.I. Joe is Scrap Iron on the Cobra side. Like Scrap Iron just gets shit done every time. Like if you watch the G.I. Joe cartoon, I don't want to deviate too much. You knew it was business on the Cobra side when you saw Storm Shadow, Firefly, or Scrap Iron, because they got shit done. If it's just the Dreadnoks or the Baroness, yeah, somebody's gonna punch him. You don't know. Firefly could get away. Scrap Iron might do something. And I felt that way about Soundwave. Like he was smart, capable, and loyal. So it's funny. It's funny that we have the opposites. I do love Starscream though. I definitely have some Starscream stuff as well.
It's just that voice. When you hear him as a kid and he's belching that out, and it's just like, it's like, yeah, man. Then he turns into a fighter jet. It's just like, okay, you got me.
It's especially good when like he's talking shit and like, Megatron's behind him. He's like, I'm the best and I should be in control. He's like, what was that, Starscream? I mean, Lord Megatron, if I can control a little more, perhaps you can do a little better. that's a terrible impression, but it's great when he turns around. You just laugh. You can't help it.
He's the only Transformer that his toys, when they're marketed to adults, comes with the little crown and the little cape that he wore for one scene in the movie. And I always laugh because it's like no Transformer is really known for their clothing. That's not a thing.
Right.
But he's got this crown. It just sits on his head because of course he's the only one who would want a coronation for the 30 seconds he's in charge. And I just was like, you do you, Starscream. I am there to support you.
He is definitely the most extra of the Transformers. And that's saying a lot when you have guys like Omega Supreme and Octopunch and Longtooth. Somehow he is the most extra. Repugnus. How could he be the most extra? But he's still.
Yeah, agreed.
The only thing I would add is like you can almost tell that Simon Furman knew this was only going to get a year. It really feels like you're halfway done with the story.
Yes.
And I think it was very common at the time. Like Neil Gaiman talks about how he thought that Sandman would only get a year. At this time, comic books that were a little bit good but didn't sell well, they would round out the year and go along. Like now, they'll just pull the plug anytime. Relaunch with like a negative 1.2 or whatever. I can't understand anymore. I'm very old, everyone. But like at the time that you get around issue 7, they'd be like, listen, we're going to cancel it. It's not going to last, more than 12 issues. Like if you look at like WCW, Bill and Ted, this is a common thing. If you look at, there's a lot of DC issues, like Chain Gang War was the same, 12 issues. And so I think Furman knew, like, we talked about prior, he went balls to the wall because I don't think he knew this wasn't going to sell. It wasn't going to get over. I think the number one problem with Generation 2 is like it launches in 92, but the last Transformers are on the shelf in like 1990. So what you want, like, there's not really time for something. Hey, it's like I tell people sometimes, you got to go away before somebody can miss you, and I don't know that it went away long enough for people to miss it. I think that Beast Wars, although I've never gotten into it because I didn't have a cable at the time, so I couldn't watch it. I think Beast Wars was a better way to update it at the time, from an IP standpoint, from a sales standpoint, from my standpoint. Transformers Generation 2, that's where it's at, y'all. Big guns, big stake, big adventure, and a big UK feel. That's where it's at.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about the weird Autobot mystics who show up at the beginning of issue 5 and help Prime go on his spirit journey, for lack of a better word. And I love this because it comes out of nowhere. It's like you're in the middle of all these crazy battles, and Optimus Prime is like, no, I think the magic crucifix in my chest is telling me something. Let me go home. Let me talk to the magic men who may live underground, and I'm going to go through this crazy vision quest and try to figure out what the heck is going on here. And it's so funny because it's like it does set up the rest of the series, what he learns there, what he sees, and everything else. But it's just like, it's like Furman knew that. Furman's like, I got to do an info dump, and I got to do it for a character that can drive the rest of the story, and I got to do it in a believable way. And it's funny too, Dean just mentioned Beast Wars, but like there's a very famous scene in the Beast Wars cartoon where Optimus Prime's successor, Optimus Prime, does something similar, and it's like I have to go in and I have to gain higher knowledge, I have to talk to the center, if you will. And I just love the fact that this like super spiritual, quasi-religious thing is in the middle of this comic where giant robots are shooting each other.
Yeah.
So again, it's just like, good on you, Simon. You did well, man.
Yeah,
I mean, think about that too when we juxtapose the characters of Optimus Prime and Megatron again. When Optimus Prime does this, like, people are like, I wish Prime was around, but nobody's like, fuck you, Prime. What a dumb idea, Prime. This is terrible, Prime. They get impatient, sure, don't get me wrong, but nobody's like that. Can you imagine Megatron doing this, like in the middle of all these battles, being like, you know what? I've got to consult a higher power to determine what we should do next as a force, as a race, as anything. Because again, like I talked about earlier, for Megatron, like you said too, it's like Thanos for the MCU, or it's Galactus. Galactus is. Megatron is. There's no higher power than Megatron. How could Megatron make a mistake? Yeah. How could Megatron say anything wrong? And that's what really makes us all identify with Optimus Prime. If you'll notice in other like archetypes like this, there's a lot of Duke haters in G.I. Joe. There's a decent amount of He-Man haters, people who really like Skeletor and those guys more. Optimus Prime is the front good guy. And think about John Cena in the WWE. A lot of people hated John Cena as this babyface. We all love babyface Optimus Prime because he's willing to talk to his folks. He's willing to talk to the people who, quote unquote, who are under his command, and he's willing to consult a higher power when he's not sure. Whatever that means for you. For some people, that's praying, it's meditating, it's talking to a mentor. Maybe it's all of those things, but that's something we relate to because as humans, we don't have all the answers. Megatron, we don't relate. He just has them all. And that's why we love it when Optimus Prime does this, and that's why we love it when he beats Megatron.
That's right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it also allows for the villains to have these overwhelming stakes. Like, I mean, you think in the cartoon where it's like, okay, there's a certain number of Decepticons and they go back to their base, there's a certain number of Autobots going back to their base. But something that gets played up a lot in the comics is like the Decepticons control their entire planet. Like the Autobots really are the underdogs here, and they're just like warships and soldiers and everything ready to take the turn. And Megatron is very much aware of that fact. Like he's playing with his food, and I love the fact that he gets to be this overwhelming force, and Prime gets to evolve and figure out what he needs to do to make sure that the most people make it through. And again, it's a very simple morality story. It's made to sell toys, but it reverberates and it connects to me on some very like basic level. So yeah, I'm with you. Clearly it hit the mark.
Jesse, what did you think about it? Like, I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts as somebody who, obviously Darry and I just fucking Transformers smart. I mean, just like, and that's why I can't watch the movies, honestly. I don't think they're bad, but I want these movies to be like very inside baseball. Like, oh man, it's Beachcomber.
Yeah.
Sell a lot. Here comes Warpath and Minosaur's there. Nobody cares. But
There's
Jesse,
no way.
you like the Transformers, but you're not as inside baseball, as deep cut as we are. What did you think about these first 6 issues?
Well, I mean, hey, I'm on board, man, because as long as I can figure out who is participating, it's pretty simple. Optimus Prime and Megatron. That's been there for me forever and a day. Right. Introducing Jahaxis, I can't wait to see what this swarm's going to be that's coming. Obviously, that's a threat that's going to be happening here in these next 6 issues, I assume, will hopefully get resolved. I want to see Prime succeed, and I know Megatron he's made a mistake already by not listening to Prime. How many times has he done that? So I know that's happened.
A great point. Like, do you think Prime likes you? Like, do you think he just wants to come talk to you? Like, you're not a good friend.
No kidding. And
like, you should probably listen to him.
Megatron's, they always play right into my hands. Here we go. Spark of light. All right. Thanks a lot, Prime. See you later. But yeah, at some point, I can't wait to see Megatron realize, and I don't even know if that's going to happen just based upon who Megatron is, but he's going to probably get a good dose of like, oh shit, what have I done? Because maybe I should have listened to Prime. I don't know. I that's what I'm expecting to happen. So I'm on the hook. I mean, I've enjoyed what I've got so far. It's properties, it's toys that I've enjoyed in my childhood, and it's been written well. This could have been something that could have really flopped, and I understand why you guys were suggesting it. Number one, to read and go through and do a podcast on it. So I'm excited to talk about the next 6 issues when we get to it.
My only regret is this didn't go long enough as a series in total to allow for them to have the laser Optimus Prime. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but one of the last Primes released was such a 90s thing where Optimus...
I'm on the internet right now. I'm going to it. Laser Optimus Prime.
He turned into an oil tanker. He had a giant lightsaber light up sword. He had these ridiculous shoulder pad looking things. I had it as a kid. I loved it. I still have it. But one of the things I was looking for in this was like, oh man, if this had gone on for just a few more issues, Prime would have had to have died again and come back as this ridiculous, over the top, like put the Michael Bay version to bed type of Prime. Unfortunately, I never got that in comics because by the time they came back under a company called Dreamwave Studios, he was back to his classic form.
Oh,
maybe you'll still get to see him, and you're right. That's a great look. It's very 90s. And I know some people will hear this and not like it, but that's Rob Liefeld's Optimus Prime. And it's great. Yeah. And it's great. So I agree with you. Like I said, the only real regret I have, I wish I'd seen Ultra Magnus. I think that's the only character that really could have added something to this story. I feel like because everything in this story is a lot about conflict and more. And as far as the Autobots go, with the possible exception of Cup, I don't know that anybody has more to say or works more well with those themes than Ultra Magnus. Also, I just like him. He looks cool.
Let's go ahead. We'll get into plugs. Dean Compton, tell us about the Unspoken Decade and all the other stuff we got going on. Did someone say Unspoken Decade? The place where you need to go to check out some great articles about comics in the 90s? This would be a good time to plug a sponsor of the W2M network, and that is Grammarly. For you, the listeners of Unspoken Issues, Grammarly is offering a free download of the Grammarly software. Grammarly's AI-powered products help people communicate more effectively. Grammarly helps you write mistake-free on Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and nearly anywhere else you write on the web. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. To download Grammarly today, go to getgrammarly.com/W2M network. Again, that's getgrammarly.com/W2M network to download Grammarly for free.
Man, when I talk about it, it sounds like I'm so busy, but y'all, I'm so lazy as fuck. But we're over at the UnspokenDecade.com. SymbiFan publishes a lot of great articles over there. Every time we do one of these podcasts, I say I'm going to try and write something again soon because I don't want to sound conceited. But you're like, you should write something again. We miss you writing, and I say I'm gonna, and then I don't. So let's just do that again. I'm going to try and write something again soon. Probably won't, but we'll go on from there. We are pretty active on the Facebook page, so check us out on Facebook and at Unspoken Decade on Twitter. I've tried to be a lot more active in the last 2 or 3 months over there, posting 3 or 4 pics a day, trying to get more conversations. Feel free to come say hello over there. That's probably about it. That's where you can reach us, and we're always looking for more people to discuss 90s comics with, good, bad, in between. To me, they all have a special place in my heart.
Very good. All right, yeah, you can check out the Unspoken Issues Facebook page. That's where usually these podcasts are going to be posted. Come on over, be a member. We do polls, okay? This is how this works. We've set out a Facebook poll, and then you have a hand in what we're going to talk about. So if something comes up here, I think that last poll that we put up, we got some cartoon comic books. I think it was Duckman, and oh my goodness, I can't remember the other one, but I know it's out there. It's probably going to be coming to an end soon. Chris Armstrong and myself are probably going to get together and talk about that. But yeah, we're in the 30s, at least for our episodes here. So check out the archive that I have posted, the playlist, YouTube playlist link. We started, I want to say it was about 2 years ago. I think I just saw that pop up. I think it was a couple of years ago when we started the podcast. So anyway, shout out to the W2M network for hosting the podcast. And of course, shout out to the Radulich and Broadcasting Network as well. For Darry Weight, for D. Compton, I'm Jesse Starcher. We'll be catching you later. Have a good one. Autobots, roll out.
Wow.